I invite you to stand now in honor of the living word, whose voice can be heard in the written word, coming to us today from the 28th chapter of Genesis. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He reached a certain place and spent the night there. When the sun had set, he took one of the stones at that place and put it near his head. Then he lay down there. He dreamed and saw a raised staircase, a ladder, its foundation on earth and its top touching the sky, and God's messengers were ascending and descending on it. Suddenly the Lord was standing on it and saying, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will become like the dust of the earth. You will spread out to the west, east, north, and south. Every family of earth will be blessed because of you and your descendants. I am with you now. I will protect you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done everything that I have promised you." When Jacob woke from his sleep, he thought to himself, "The Lord is definitely in this place, but I didn't know it." He was terrified and thought, "This sacred place is awesome. It's none other than God's house and the entrance to heaven." After Jacob got up early in the morning, he took the stone that he had put near his head, set it up as a sacred pillar, and poured oil on the top of it. He named that sacred place Bethel. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. You may be seated. We had a roofer come to the church this week to look for leaks. It's been real frustrating to Isaiah. It's been real frustrating to the trustees. It's frustrating to anybody who's ever had a leaking roof because it's hard to find where the leak is. Part of the reason is the water travels someplace before it starts dripping. It's a rare find when you see the water dripping right below the hole that needs to be repaired. It's just really hard. But this week when the roofers were there, they found something else that I think is more of a mystery. And as much as I love mysteries, this is a puzzle that I think I need some help solving. When the roofers got up there, they found that the cover for one of the vents had all the screws removed, sitting there on the roof. As if they're going to take the cover or maybe go inside the cover. We don't know. The problem is that particular vent is over the kitchen, and the only way to get to that roof is with a really tall ladder. Nobody remembers seeing a ladder up against the church. We don't know of anybody who's been on the roof other than the roofers. So we're puzzled by who, how, and when somebody removed those screws. Now, if you got an idea, talk to Isaiah about it. We'd love to figure it out. Now, I don't know why I tell you that story to start my sermon, except that that's one way we use a ladder. At least we think they used a ladder. Ladders are tools, and we lean them up against something to reach higher, or sometimes we use them to get lower. They've been working on building an elevator and across the hallway from my office, and one of the first things they had to do is get a ladder in there and go down into the basement, and then use a ladder to go all the way to the top of the elevator shaft. So they were using the elevators to go from one plane to another, sometimes high, sometimes low, but always using a ladder. It reminded me that we oftentimes use ladders as a metaphor about success. We talk about going up the ladder of success. In 1970, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant wrote about a woman who got everything she wanted all the time without ever giving back. They cynically told the story of her attempt as if she were building a stairway to heaven. You might recognize their lyrics as a song that Led Zeppelin did, Stairway to Heaven. Unfortunately, I think there are people who continue to try to build a stairway to heaven. Sometimes they build it on good works, as if the different things we do are rungs on this ladder that lead us to heaven. There are some people who think the way to get there is to know everything that's in the Bible. And then there are those who say that it really is about doing one particular thing or saying one particular thing that's the way to go up this ladder that leads to heaven. It's an easy temptation for all of us to fall into, though. For those of us who believe that our faith does show up in our actions, as James reminds us. It really is a small step from receiving grace to looking at and paying attention to our actions. Because we know grace is received, we want to be grateful and show our gratitude by doing things like coming to worship on a regular basis, by tithing regularly, by helping serve lunch at the open door. Pretty soon we realize that the calendar is what we're turning to figure out what we need to do, as if it's those activities that are more important than the relationship with Jesus. Now, some people say we might go too far the other way. They might think that we've gone so far the other direction that has nothing to do with who we are or what we've done. Some people say it's all about having the right belief. Richard Rohr suggests that response may be part of the problem with Christianity in America today. He says, what set us on the wrong path was making the object of religious faith ideas or doctrines instead of a person. Our faith, he says, is not a belief that dogmas or moral opinions are true, but a faith that ultimate reality or God or Jesus is accessible to us and even on our side. Jesus was able to touch and heal people who trusted him as an emissary of God's love, not people who assessed intellectual statements and decided whether or not they were true or false. In other words, he says, faith is more how to believe than what to believe. And when I read that, I recognized something I've said numerous times to people who've asked me the question of what it is that United Methodists believe. I mean, it's really hard because there's a wide umbrella under which many of us stand. And there are folks underneath that umbrella who are on the far left, and there are folks who are on the far right, and there are folks who are in that place that Bishop Scott Jones refers to as the extreme center. But what marks us as United Methodist is not what we believe as much as it is how we believe. It is our method that became the notable characteristic of our spiritual forebears. They were chided and derided for being so methodical in living out their faith that they earned the name Methodist. Now, that's not, it's about the right practice, not the right doctrine. Now, it doesn't mean doctrine doesn't matter, but what's more important was the practice of our faith. Maybe the problem really is, or can be boiled down to, looking at the ladder as if it's a ladder that we climb, as we just sang, higher, higher. Doesn't matter what we think is the ladder or the rungs. If we think we are climbing the ladder, we have misunderstood what our faith is about. Think about it. Jacob is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, he really is a scoundrel. There's nothing really good you can say about this guy. And, I mean, his own brother has said, as soon as Dad dies, I'm going to kill you. And so he runs. He leaves behind his family. He will never see his mother or father again. He's out there with nothing. I mean, he has so little with him that he uses a rock for a pillow. He's out in the middle of nowhere. He doesn't know where he is. He knows he's on his way to meet some of his mother's family. He may have heard of them before, but he has never met them. And there he is, and he feels all alone. He thinks he is all alone. I don't know if you've ever felt all alone. Have you ever thought that you were the only one, that no one was on your side? Have you ever been in one of those places where you made a decision that you had to change course so radically that there was no more going back? And if you don't know of a story in your own life that's like that, maybe you know somebody who has been in those places where they are all alone. Take a few minutes. Talk to someone in the pew near you. Tell about a story of someone who was all alone in the world. And if you can't think of anyone, tell each other what you would be most concerned about if you found yourself in the place Jacob found himself that night. Let's talk. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. As lonely as you may feel, or as lonely as you may have felt, the truth is, God never leaves us. That's what Psalm 139 was about. Try as we might, we cannot flee from God's presence. God will always be with us. That's the message Jacob hears that night in his dream, the dream about a ladder. But the thing about the ladder is, he's not the one that climbs it. It's God and God's messengers who come down to where Jacob is. The good news is that he is not alone. Jacob is met by God in this, he might have thought, God-forsaken place. But here he is in the middle of nowhere, and God meets him. Jacob names that place Bethel, a word that means house of God. And God comes to meet us too. It's the first story of the Christian faith. God is with us. Emmanuel. God with us. Jacob says, this sacred place is awesome. It's none other than God's house and the entrance to heaven. And I say to you that this is God's house. The place where you live is God's house. The path you travel from where you live to where you work or where you go to school is God's house. More importantly, those places where you feel all alone, those times when you feel like you have been defeated, those experiences that make you feel like you are in the wilderness, and maybe especially those times when you were there because of your own doing. There, that place is God's house. There's a rabbi who talks about how he approaches those wilderness moments. He says, whenever I face that valley of the shadow of death, I remember Jacob's ladder. And I envision the angels coming down the ladder and the angels going back up the ladder. And as I envision them, I begin to breathe. And I breathe out as I see them coming down. And I breathe in as I see them going up. And I breathe out. And I breathe in. And I breathe out. And I breathe in. And I remember the angels are coming and going. God and God's messengers come to meet you wherever you are. And the message they give you is the same message they gave Jacob that night. You are not alone. You are beloved. And because you are loved, you can live life differently. You see, not only is this the house of God, he also said it's the entrance to heaven. So maybe we need to take the rabbi's advice and just breathe. Imagine angels coming down to meet us with every breath we take. Imagine angels taking our concerns back to God as we breathe out. It might help us to remember that just because we can't see God doesn't mean God isn't there. I mean, that's the message of Elisha when his servant can't see that God is all around. So Elisha prays that God will open his eyes, and he sees a whole host of angels surrounding them. Like God in Jacob's life. Like God in our lives. God was there. God is there. God will continue to be there all the time. You are never alone. Thanks be to God. Amen.